Hello and welcome to iBuzz. I'm your host Nosheen Bukhari, bringing you the latest and most exciting entertainment news. In today's episode, we will be discussing the future of James Bond franchise, followed by a movie review on Truman Show. But before that, let me quickly take you to the top stories of the day. James Bond franchise future at critical juncture after Daniel Craig admit 007 producers. Dua Lipa sued for posting a paparazzi photo of herself on Instagram. Netflix announces release date of The Witcher Season 2. Madonna expressed that Britney Spears' conservatorship is a violation to human rights. And Marvel's Black Widow debuts with dazzling $80 million in theaters. And now moving to the top story of the day. James Bond producers have admitted that the 007 franchise's future is at a critical juncture after Daniel Craig bows out in No Time to Die this autumn. To have further discussion on the subject, we have film and theater director Julio Maria-Entertainment with us. Julio, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So Julio, following Amazon's acquisition of MGM in an $8.45 billion merger, the Bond producers have admitted that the 007 franchise is at a critical juncture. Now, in your opinion, how is this merger affecting the franchise?
Well, I think the franchise is always in an interesting situation because it's deals with something that's quite anachronistic, which is a spy who's, a throwback to the Cold War era, and they're constantly having to try and find new ways to make that character relevant. In terms of the Amazon acquisition, there's always the question, will they want to push, the films onto streaming more? I suspect that in the end, they're going to have these films shown at the theatre primarily first. They're massive visual spectacles first and foremost, and there's an interest in keeping the value of that alive and relevant, and to put it on as a streaming first experience I think would be a huge mistake, so I don't think they'll do that.
Right, and allegedly Amazon wants to put more sci-fi elements into the Bond franchise in the next reboot after Daniel Craig's era. In fact, fans are also anticipating that what changes will go forward from here after this deal. Do you think this strategy will keep the element of innovation intact?
Yeah, well, I think the sci-fi thing is probably actually quite smart. I mean, the just sort of retired CEO of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and also Richard Branson are currently launching themselves into space. And the idea of, a super rich villain, in this case, operating in space isn't even new to the James Bond franchise. Moonraker was, one of the more absurd but popular and still, well remembered and much loved James Bond adventures. And I think if they do that, they'll be returning to that, but obviously trying to make something a little less hokey and a bit more up to date. So I think that seems like a perfectly interesting avenue for them to take, and would be, very entertaining. I don't see a problem with that.
Right, but on the other hand, Julio, don't you think that adding sci-fi also gives an impression of another Mission Impossible movie, meaning that Bond franchise might lose its significance that way?
Yeah, they've constantly been juggling the fact that things like the Bourne Identity and Mission Impossible are taking, some of the sort of are actually jumping ahead of the Bond films to a certain extent in terms of what they're able to do. And so I think actually they're always trying to borrow from those franchises, borrow from franchises that have stolen from them, and sort of, take the baton back and take it further and see what they can do with it. Always, I think they're having to sort of find a role for James Bond in that, and it's not always an easy thing to do. But I think it makes perfect sense that they would be doing that, and they'll have seen the success of Mission Impossible. Actually, I'm sure they're quite jealous of the fact that, envious of the fact that Mission Impossible seemed to sort of churn out these films with a lot greater rapidity than the James Bond franchise, which is beginning to have these very disturbingly large gaps in it. And I think they'll be looking at that now and thinking, you know, how do we create a scenario where we have films coming out with greater regularity and people are sort of beginning to, you know, look forward to the next one in the same way that they're looking forward to the next Mission Impossible film, and not thinking they're going to have to wait another 5 years or so.
Right. A Bond franchise is probably one of the very few franchises that has experimented very less with production. Now, after Daniel Craig, number one question is about the new Bond. Some critics have suggested the franchise owners to be more inclusive, wanting to add people of different ethnicities and colors. In your opinion, will that bring more power to the franchise?
Yeah, I think it would be very likely that they do that. I don't think it's definite, but I think they'll be taking serious consideration of that and trying to find an actor, you know, probably a British actor who's black or brown. They might find, you know, another a white-skinned actor as well. Who knows? But I think that really they're going to be looking for someone. I mean, the thing is they've always got to work with who's available and who wants to do it and who's willing to commit to, you know, possibly, you know, 10 years of their life to this project if it goes well. But I think they'll be looking at, you know, for a more inclusive sort of casting going forwards. I think that makes perfect sense, especially with the way Britain's headed as a more sort of ethnically diverse society. It really does make sense. And, you know, I think it would be a clever thing to do.
Right. Julio, since the launch of Disney Plus, Marvel Studios and Lucasfilm have been expanding their shared universes for the MCU and Star Wars across film and TV. And now that Amazon has purchased James Bond Studio, MGM, could we be about to see the same thing happening to the world of 007?
I think it's possible, and it's a really interesting idea. I think that they're going to have to be very sort of careful about that. I don't think it's the easiest thing in the world to do. You know, the Bond has only ever existed as, you know, a set of novels and then these films. And there really haven't been sort of any significant explorations in any other media. I'm sure there have been little things here and there. And so to create, let's say, a TV series or a spin-off TV series would be an interesting thing. But I think it would be very, very careful they don't dilute the major sort of, you know, part of their franchise if they do that. But I'm sure they'll be talking about it, and it would make sense.
Okay. Mark Edlitz, the author of The Lost Adventure of James Bond, said that the deal will not impact the theatrical release date of Bond. No Time to Die will still be a worldwide theatrical release, as it should be. It will not skip the theaters and head straight to Amazon Prime. Then why is there a contradiction between the statements of the producers and the author of the film? I mean, producers say that its future is compromised after this merging, but the author is saying something different. So what do you think of this?
Well, I think this film's definitely going to go ahead in the cinema first, and that's the correct home for James Bond. I think James Bond's always relied on spectacle and travelogue and seeing parts of the world that in previous years the audience would never get to see themselves. Now it's a lot easier to go to those places. I think there's always a tension between cinema exhibition and streaming, and we don't know ultimately where that's going to end. And I think that Amazon are always going to be looking at the fact that, you know, what's going to be happening 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line with regards to cinema exhibition. Maybe it'd be just more difficult for some people to get to a cinema in, let's say, 10 years. It's already more difficult, but maybe it'd be just simply impossible for some people to get to a cinema in 10 years' time. I think that'll be a very sad day when that happens, but it's possibly what Amazon have to look at. I think the producers of Bond are also engaged in a publicity exercise that they're looking at, you know, if people aren't talking about what's going to happen with Bond in the future, what's going to happen with the character, the actor, the next actor going to play Bond, they've got to talk about all these options. And that's a publicity exercise as much as something else, because it's not, you know, if they just cast someone as Bond and the next film's scheduled for 2 years' time and they don't talk about it much, it's no longer an event. They're not building up to that. So I think there's something quite calculated about that that's totally necessary, and it's what people expect. And people, as time goes on, we learn that people really love talking about films as much as they go, you know, as much as they go and going to see them. You know, talking about them online, talking about them in person is part of the cinema experience. So I completely understand why they would be doing that. For the time being, I don't think that cinema exhibition of James Bond will be in jeopardy, because I think everybody involved knows that the spectacle aspect of it is so important, and that can't easily be replicated in the home to the same degree.
Right. And Julie, the franchise is almost about to become 60 years old. Over the time, James Bond producers are interested in pushing 007 boundaries after a risky Daniel Craig era. Do you think the producers will be able to target the modern day audience, which is increasing day by day with a different taste in movies? And probably because of these long breaks in Bond movies, they do not have that sort of attachment with this franchise.
Yeah, it's common to speak to people that have never seen a James Bond film, which for me, you know, when I first heard that, I thought that's incredible. I've watched all of them since I was first allowed to, aged 8 or whatever. I was begging for weeks to be able to see one. I finally got to see one, and I watched all of them. And, you know, some people haven't seen any.
Yeah.
I think it's a real problem with James Bond, and it's really, really difficult because they're dealing with an anachronism that they have to keep on making relevant, or they have to keep on making a joke out of.
Absolutely.
And, you know, the fact is, in the modern world, James Bond would probably only have to sit at a computer all the time to do all the work he does. You know, so much of intelligence now and spying is done online. It's almost exclusively done online. The idea of a guy going around abseiling down a building and shooting people is, you know, no longer really seems credible. So you have to create this sort of hybrid fantasy world where he seems believable. Now, that's true of all films, but I think it's particularly true of James Bond, and they have to continually create worlds in which this anachronism, this unlikely figure, seems to actually be the only man who can save the world. When really, actually, you just probably need someone with a thumb drive sticking it in a computer. But that's half the fun, and the journey there is sort of like, you know, it's part of the filmmaker's creative process. But the world has changed immeasurably since James Bond first hit our screens. You know, when we could, you know, the idea of going to these countries he was going to was impossible for most people. So it was a really, really big event to go and watch a film where someone got to do these things, got to go abroad to all these places, and we'd see them in widescreen, and we'd see them, you know, we see this small figure in this on this canvas, and that was really exciting. And continually having to do that is very difficult, but I'm sure they'll find a way. That's probably why the sci-fi element's being brought in, because it's something people still can't do.
Right. Julio, great discussion. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
That was Julio Maria-Martino with his views on the future of Bond franchise. And now moving to other story details of the day. Dua Lipa is being sued for posting a paparazzi photo of herself on her Instagram account. The levitating singer shared an image of herself waiting in line for a flight in February 2019. Integral Images, the company that owns the copyright to the photo, is now accusing Lipa of knowingly sharing it without permission or authorization. The company alleges that the singer has profited from the photo due to the fact that her Instagram account is monetized. Integral Images was granted copyright for the image on 20th February 2021, 2 weeks after Lipa's post. Lipa has since deleted the post, but Integral Images is still seeking $150,000 in damages. The Witcher Season 2 will release on Netflix on December 17, 2021. The date was announced during the WitcherCon livestream today and puts the second season 2 years after the first season, which aired in December of 2019. At the end of the stream, Netflix also revealed the first proper trailer for the season. The reigning queen of pop posted a throwback photo of herself in a shirt that read Britney Spears to her Instagram stories with the caption, "Give this woman her life back." Madonna is just one of several stars who have come out in support of Spears in weeks since her bombshell testimony in which she called her conservatorship abusive and asked Judge Brendy Penny to end it. Disney and Marvel's superhero adventure Black Widow captured a massive $80 million in its first weekend, crushing the benchmark for the biggest opening weekend since the pandemic. In a first for the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the film opened simultaneously in theaters and on Disney+. Disney reported that Black Widow generated more than $60 million that a Disney Plus Premier Access consumer spent globally, marking the rare occasion in which a studio discloses revenues for digital rentals. Overseas, Black Widow collected $78 million in its debut, boosting its global box office haul to $158 million. And that is it from our newsroom. We will be right back after a quick short break with a movie review. Stay tuned to find out. Welcome back. In this segment, we will be reviewing the 1998 comedy movie Truman Show. An insurance salesman is oblivious of the fact that his entire life is a TV show and his family members are mere actors. This Jim Carrey starrer bagged $264.1 million in box office. To review the movie, we are joined by one of our favorite film critics, Mayank Shekhar. Mayank, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Nosheen.
So, Mayank, I cannot imagine being filmed my entire life for a show like that. The filmmakers came up with a very unique comedy element in this movie. What do you think of that?
Well, honestly, I don't think it's a comedy as much as it's a take on what became reality for the world only in the next 15 years from when the film came out. I mean, technically speaking, everyone who is on social media is living a Truman Show. And to think of that in the late 90s was phenomenal. Of course, one assumes it would be a comedy because it stars Jim Carrey, and Jim Carrey was by far the top comedian and therefore the biggest actor or superstar at the time in the since mid 90s. I think 1990 was his breakout year when he did The Mask, when he did Ace Ventura, the detective. He did Dumb and Dumber. So that established him as a hardcore slapstick comedy star. But this film actually changed his image hugely, because this is a really serious film that makes you think about so many things to do with society, to do with lives, and to do with what became reality only a few years later.
And Carrey delivers an incredibly convincing performance as the lead character. He steps out of his comfort zone of slapstick comedy and humor and does so with finesse and style in this movie.
Absolutely. I think the tone of the film is usually light. It's not, I mean, a good example of comparing something like this to what's happening in, say, television or cinema would be something like a Black Mirror. Now, Black Mirror is an extremely dark show, but is also predicting at some level where society is headed from a technology point of view. This one is all black humor, but far more black, but at the same time, very light, that you almost engage with it at a level where it's believable. But more than anything else, more than Jim Carrey, more than direction, that's by Peter Weir, more than, of course, the writing, of course, but more than production design, given that the whole thing is a set, the entire film is set, it's actually the point it's trying to make, which makes it far more relevant now than it was in 1999. The point about, say, a surveillance society. Now, every single place you go to, Nosheen, no matter which part of the world you live in, whether you're on the road, you're in your building, there is a camera that follows you wherever you go. And this movie is really about that, isn't it? There is a camera following him, except everyone else around him are all actors. Who knows? That's the world we live in as well.
The actors Laura Linney, Ed Harris, Natasha, they all had been truly impactful, especially Ed Harris. How would you define his character?
Well, I think all the other characters in the film are essentially playing actors within the movie that's playing within the film, right?
Yes.
In the sense that it's technically supposed to be a reality show that the whole world is watching, and Mr. Truman, that's Jim Carrey, is the only person who's real there. Everyone else is an actor. So in that sense, I think it's it's already very meta. It's a thing within a thing. And I mean, all performances are fantastic. There's not one to pick out as that one thing, because this is really centered on Jim Carrey in a real sense. But I think the larger situation is, and I watched the film, after 99, I actually watched this movie first time last night, right? And of course, there's enough in the film that had not left me at all. Like I remember scene by scene of this film, that's how impactful that film was. But one of the things I thought of, and which is probably why one should not always revisit classics, is that, can a camera really get all these angles of a person? If you're really watching a TV show within a film, then that's not possible. So I think if they had made a film like this now, we would have watched it like CCTV cameras following a person, and it would be just as real.
Right. And Mayank, according to some, the movie starts off a little dull but gets so incredibly exciting in the second half, especially the last 30 minutes. So what do you think of that?
Well, I don't think this film can be seen from the perspective of first and second half purely because it's such a concept-driven film, and the concept really kicks in, obviously at some point in the movie, which is not the beginning. And once it does, it opens your eyes to a whole new reality it's trying to show. So it's really, the movie really starts from an audience's perspective, from the point when the whole thing is a damn reality show. I think in terms of impact, you know what I mean? I do not think there is any film in the history of films that's led to a disease named after it. And there's actually something called a Trumen syndrome. There are people in the world who believe that they actually live a reality show. You know what I mean? And of course, it's a mental ailment and it's been diagnosed as such, and they've called it Trumen syndrome. But imagine a movie being, imagine a disease being named after a film. That's how prophetic that film was. The second thing, this came out in 1998. 1999 is roughly when Big Boss, called Big Boss here in the subcontinent, that reality show that comes from India, or what's called, Big Brother abroad. Big Brother is Truman's show in a real sense. People are living in a set. Their whole life is being watched by the whole world. I'm pretty sure Truman's show had a lot to do with Big Brother, and they actually showed it. It's possible to live that life, and it's possible for that many people to be interested to actually watch someone's life, day in and day out. So I think it's not about first half, second half. It's really about the concept, and it's really about the relevance of the concept in the media world we live in. All of us who are on Facebook, all of us who are on, on Instagram, aren't we all on Truman Show?
Right. And Mayank, the execution of such a concept for a movie itself back in 1998 was very challenging. And of course, with a dash of emotions, not only sci-fi, but emotions. Did you find it different from other Jim Carrey movies? If yes, then how?
No, absolutely. I think given the way Jim Carrey started his career, given the way his face moves, it's a talent that he has, which clearly nobody has, and therefore everyone tries to exploit that talent film after film. It becomes so stereotyped so soon, right? That sooner or later, if a film like Truman Show had not come in his career, and thereafter even a film like Eternal, Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, if that film had not happened for him, he would have just remained an actor who would be remembered, very vaguely, because films like Dumb and Dumber don't have that those long legs as a movie like this does, because of the relevance of those concepts, right? You can't, so in that sense, I think it was a career-defining film for Jim Carrey. And one of the things I was thinking about last night rewatching this film is, where is Jim Carrey gone here? We don't see him, we hardly see him. And I'm sure he's around. I think he's still being wasted all over again. We need to bring him back on screen, because a talent of this nature, of his, I did read up on him a little more, purely because I was wondering where he was, and apparently he's been suffering from a mental illness of his, in the sense of he's been depressed, he's been suffering depression himself, and all those things that happen to a lot of geniuses and a lot of artists. But I really want to see him far more in the movies, and I genuinely missed him from back in the 90s. How big was he, and how amazing was he, as he is in the movie as well.
True. Mayank, that was a wonderful review. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Nosheen. Thank you for having me. Cheers.
That was Mayank Shekhar reviewing Truman Show. And that is it from today's episode. We hope you liked it. Don't forget to share your feedback on the social media link mentioned down below. We'll see you next time. Until then, take care and goodbye.